Hi all, this is a process video on how to use a scale figure in Rhino to show depth. I brought in the scale peeps that we had used for scaling our sections in ARCH 131. So I'm going to go ahead and grab John Lennon here and breathe the move command. And I'm going to grab the bottom of his foot. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put him behind this screen wall. And this is our classmate Sarah from the morning studio. This is her project. And so what I want to do is locate. This is a solid, that's open, solid, open, solid, open. And so if you're not familiar with Sarah's project, this is harder to read, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move John Lennon to maybe a spot where I'm going to get a lot of his sort of walking action here, and then I'm going to make sure, you see he's pretty much on the ground here. Here he's going into the ground. We'll get to that in a second. And now I'm going to trim. I'm going to trim him via an operation of trim, enter, and then using shift click, I'm grabbing all of the solid panels that would obscure him in elevation. And so hitting enter now after I've selected my objects, and now the objects I want to cut. So I know this area is open. So that means this is a closed panel. So that would be blocking. So as you can see, it's going to trim him out. Trim him out. Trim him out. And then I'm getting this panel is seen. So I'm going to go in again, get this piece out. Piece out, these pieces out, okay, and then again, that's going to be deleted later. This here, right, that's gone. That's gone. See, portion of his foot, that part of his toe is missing. This part of his heel is missing, and so on, right? So now I've got most of him obscured. That way I have a few floating lines. I can double check here. Looks like this one here, that one's going to be completely obscured, so I'll get to that in a second. Portion of his jacket's good. See that layer. This piece here, that's going to be trimmed. Okay, so as I start to get the obscured figure here, I can now trim now the ground. So again, this foot, just by the notion of the scale figure, the fact the scale figure came out, I'm going to go ahead and trim in below the ground there, okay. And then as I come over here, I also have the panel and framing. It's in front, so I'm going to select everything here, and I'm going to trim out the pieces that are inside. And now as I finish out this figure, this is now an entire group, so I have to actually ungroup him. And typing in ungroup now allows me to access the individual line work that wasn't trimmed away. And now via the trim command, as I clean up a few more of these pieces that are obscured by the architecture, I now have a figure that sits apart. And so in this layout, I can go back and I can regroup him, I can set him up right, but either way, that line work will give me a scale figure as if it's passing behind the screen wall. And then the only other thing I want to draw attention to is how you deal with sort of sitting in the sort of bench kind of quality, right? So let's say in this scenario, I'd like to have one of these figures sitting off to the side here, right? So I'm going to zoom in and say, this gentleman right here, I'm going to go ahead and move him to this bench right here. And then depending on what I want to do, this is actually a pretty high bench, right? Kind of a work surface. But if I were to actually want him Here, I then trim out where the bench is cutting his clothes, right, in this way. And so the last thing I can do now, since I don't have to adjust, is I can just trim out that figure. And now, even though it's way high up off the ground, this figure's sitting. And so I could go so far as to potentially move my architecture if I feel like I'm not at the height I want. But you can see how this figure looks like it's sitting on the ground, or feet on the ground, leaning on a bench, right? This sort of low bench sort of figure, right? This one in the foreground now would be in front of these pieces, right? So you could actually have this figure be the trim object this time. So cut that. Cut this. And now I'm going to trim again. And then I can delete these items. And now I have this figure that is now trimming out and sitting in front of that beam, that column, I should say, that column on the seat. Okay, hope this helps you understand a bit more about how to use the trim command and also locating figures behind things and figures in front of things. Thanks.